And what we do is we celebrate and preserve the history of talking boards and the people who use them. Our founder, Robert Murch, has investigated talking boards and their use for over 27 years. He is a historian first and foremost, but he also is fascinated by the boards and their place in pop culture as we have continued through history. We have noticed that our relationship to these boards has changed throughout history based on how our relationship with death has changed. But what I'm going to tell you about tonight, because I don't really have a ton of time, so I thought that I would tell you one of the coolest stories. And it's related to this particular board that I'm holding right here. Does anybody know how the Ouija board was named? Anybody? Anybody heard any rumors, maybe how it was named? Not a single person? Chris?
I do, yeah, kind of, the yes, no, yes.
The we and the ya.
Yeah.
That's the most common myth about the Ouija board, is that it was we for the French yes and ya for the German yes, because that's what it's a combination of. Yeah.
I heard it was somebody's name.
Ouija. Is that what you're thinking of? That's what I'm going to get to, all right? So what I'm going to tell you is the real true story of how Ouija boards were named. And the board that I am actually holding in my hand, we have discovered is extremely likely to be the board that resulted in the naming of the Ouija board. So back in 1890, the Ouija board didn't have a name. It looked just like this. Didn't have anything on it. It didn't say anything about a trademark. It was just a very basic wooden board with some letters and some numbers on it. They wanted to start a company, and they wanted to start manufacturing it. Now, in order to do that, they had to have a name for it, and they needed to have a patent. So what they did is they asked Helen Peters Nosworthy. How could I forget her name? She's going to kill me. Helen Peters Nosworthy. She was the sister-in-law of Elijah Bond, who is said to have invented the Ouija board. He was also the person who patented the Ouija board. Now, Helen Peters Nosworthy was considered to be a strong medium. She used this board on a regular basis to communicate with the spirits long before Ouija was Ouija. One day they decided to sit down at the board and ask the board what it wanted to be called. The board spelled out the letters O-U-I-J-A. Helen asked, "Is that what you would like to be called?" The board said yes. And then she said, "What does that mean?" And it spelled out good luck. So what we have found, based on the news articles that were published in the Baltimore Sun back in 1890, is that the Ouija board actually named itself, told everybody what it wanted to be named by Helen Peters Nosworthy using this board. Now, Helen said that she was wearing a locket, and in the locket there was the picture of a woman, and this woman's name was Ouida, and that's what you're thinking of. And what they're thinking is that perhaps it was a misspelling of the name Ouida as opposed to Ouija. But nobody knows that for sure. All they know is that the letters that spelled out on this board were O-U-I-J-A. So the Ouija board was named, but now that the Ouija board is named, if you're going to mass market it and sell it, you don't want anybody else to be able to do that, right? So what do you need to do? You need to patent the board. So they went through patent officer after patent officer trying to get a patent for the board, and they all said, "That's ridiculous, that thing doesn't work. We can't give you a patent if it doesn't actually work." So what they needed to do is prove that this board worked. So they took this board to the patent office in Washington, D.C., and they waited until they could actually see the chief patent officer, who finally agreed to see them because they were not going to leave the office until he did. He walked in and he said to them, "Okay." He said, "I'll see you, but I absolutely will not give you a patent unless the board will spell out my name. If the board will spell out my name, I will give you your patent." Now, Helen Peters Nosworthy, as well as Elijah Bond, who operated the board, were unaware of the chief patent officer's name. They sat down at the board and they spelled out the name of the chief patent officer. He, of course, was completely and totally amazed and freaked out. He said, "You have your patent," and the patent was issued in February of 1891. And from there, the rest is history. Now, our relationship to Ouija has changed throughout history, as I mentioned, based on our relationship to death. And in fact, are you guys interested in looking at the board up close? You can pass it around if you want. Just be careful with it. It's obviously very old and very valuable. Our relationship with death has definitely changed over the years. Back in 1890, when that was first created, the Civil War had just recently ended. If you go to any old cemetery, you will see the stones, and the stones tell about people who died in their 30s, people who died in their 20s, people who died as babies, women who died in childbirth, right? People were used to death back then. And what happened when someone died back then? You didn't take them to a funeral home, did you? There was no such thing as a funeral home. You laid them out in your home, in the room, in the home that was called what? The parlor, right? Well, pretty soon as time went on, the parlor was taken over by funeral parlors. They took dead people out of the home, and they actually took care of them at a separate place. We are now growing afraid of death. We don't want it in our home. We want it to be separate from what it is that we're doing. So the funeral parlor took over the name of parlor, and we adopted a new name for that room in our house. The room that used to be called the parlor, what do we call that now? The living room. There's no accident, right? We are now focusing on the living, and we're a little afraid of the dead. And that is why, as time progressed, people have begun to be afraid of Ouija boards and other talking boards. It's because, in a roundabout way, they're saying that they're afraid of death. And then if you think about it, back in 1973, a little movie came out that you probably have all heard about, right? The Exorcist. Even if you're not old enough to have been alive when The Exorcist came out, you probably still know about that, right, Lila? I'm sure you've seen it. When The Exorcist came out and other Hollywood-type movies like Witchboard, people began to be afraid, and it's because Hollywood had taken over the myth, and now they were perpetuating a myth that wasn't necessarily true, but it was something that people started to believe. And it has now continued. And you get what this gentleman here in the middle said, don't play with those because it's going to open a portal. Well, I just want to let you know that I live in a house where in the basement we have over 250 historic boards, much like that one. If possessions and the devil or demons or anything negative are really attached to the boards themselves, if the boards themselves open portals, then let me tell you, we got about 250 portals in our basement right now. So that's just something to think about. It's related to your belief. If you believe that something is evil, whether it's the Ouija board or anything else, you may very well get evil in return. Because what you focus on is what you get. And so it's really important when you are doing any of this stuff, especially what you're going to do tonight. If any of you are first timers or you don't do a lot of this, keep in mind it doesn't matter if you're using a Ouija board or if you're recording for EVP or you're holding a pendulum in your hand or you're holding a K2 meter. All of that is communication with spirits. There is no difference between that and that wooden board that I just passed around. So just remember that when you're doing this type of stuff, that you need to focus on the positive. Keep your attention in the positive side of things as opposed to focusing on the negative. Things will feed on fear. If you're afraid, it will feed on that fear. So don't be afraid. Have some fun, do some laughing, do what we call whistling through the graveyard. If you get scared, and we all get scared, don't run. Whistle through the graveyard, and what that means is either whistle or sing a song or tell a joke. You have to change that vibration, because as soon as you raise the vibration in the room, that fear is gone, and anything that's coming on that vibration frequency, the fear vibration, they're going to have to go away. And the reason for that is because they can't follow the same frequency that we're on if we're laughing and we're having a good time. That doesn't mean that you want to goof off and interrupt things, but it means that you want to have fun and enjoy yourself tonight. Don't do anything that's going to allow you to stay in the fear mindset. Now, does anybody have any questions? Because that's all I'm going to tell you about, and then we're going to talk about rules and all that fun stuff. But does anybody have any questions about what I talked about? Yes?
What was the chief patent officer's name?
I don't know. That's a good question. I'll text Bob when I sit down and see if he knows. Yeah.
Just like, do you have a really cool experience of your own that you've done with the board?
I do.
Just like kind of brief, maybe.
How long do I have? Do I have a couple minutes?
About 4 minutes.
Okay, okay, perfect. So I went to Amargosa Hotel and Opera House in Death Valley, California. And I was there, one of the guys from Ghost Adventures was running the event. It was Billy from Ghost Adventures. And he had never actually used the Ouija board before. And so I asked him, can I bring a Ouija board with me? And he's like, oh, I don't know. He goes, I really want to try one, but I'm afraid of them. And I said, well, I'll bring it, and then if you get brave enough, we'll try it. But I don't want to do it with a bunch of people in the room, because I don't want, if somebody brings in the negative energy, I don't want that to affect us. So sure enough, later in the night, he comes and he finds me, and he said, Kelly, let's try the Ouija board. So I went and got my board, and we were meeting at a room that was said to be haunted. And just as the two of us were walking into this room, we got caught by several people who were part of the event. So they kind of funneled in with us, and they said, I just want to let you know that we're going to be using a board tonight. So if you're afraid of them, or if you don't like them, it might be a good idea to clear out before we actually start using it. They were like, no, 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 this will be fun. So Billy and I sat down. We placed our fingers on the planchette, and it started moving. Well, Billy and I are kind of looking at each other. You know, we trust each other, but we're not sure who's moving this, you know, what's going on. And for some reason, the first thing that came to Billy's mind was, are you a human spirit? And I'm like, oh, great. When are we going to start with that, right? Well, instantly, the planchette flew to no. I'm like, well, it started freaking everybody out, and as that happened, the energy in the room started changing, and I call it pulling a Captain Howdy. That planchette started flying all over the board. Billy and I are kind of looking at each other, and we both smile at each other, which was a little weird, and all four of the people who had followed us into the room flew out of the room. And I looked at him and I said, okay, that was a great idea, you know. I said, you scared those people out. He goes, oh my God, I thought you scared the people out. I said, I wasn't moving in. He said, I wasn't moving in either. We ended up spending 4 hours in that room, having a conversation with something so positive, so amazingly good, that there was no way that there was evil attached to it. And at the end, Billy said, can you show yourself to us? And I said, will you show yourself to us? Because there's a difference, right? And right next to us, this thing kind of came up out of the floor. It looked like TV snow, sparkly TV snow. Came up out of the floor. We both saw it. We reached our hands toward it, and as we did, you could see the sparkles coming out of our fingers. A little bubble appeared at the end of my finger. I like to say it looked like Glinda the Good Witch, you know, that bubble in The Wizard of Oz. And as I raised my finger, the bubble then continued up to the ceiling. We both followed it with our gaze. It popped, and we looked at each other, and Billy said, magic. And that was the end of the session. 4 hours later, it was 6 o'clock in the morning. Most amazing experience I have ever had with someone who was terrified to use the Ouija board. So there you go. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.